I first of all want to express my thanks to the Antiguan people who have always welcomed me here. I would also like to say thanks to the organizers, because I am a bit of a late entrant as a presenter. My fault, not the organizers. And you can see that by if you look at your agenda, you would see I have a very exciting theme. TBA. Of course, the advantage of that is I could say whatever I want now, right? But I'm really happy that the organizers did include me in the program. And I want to really be a bit short, just about 15 minutes or so, in order to give Matthew here a bit more time, but also to have a discussion, because I really want to hear from the audience a little bit. And I want to say that I feel enthusiastic about doing this presentation. I feel excited about this moment, this 10th of January 2013. No, 11th, isn't it?
No, 11th, yes.
And I'll tell you why. I feel excited because I can still feel the flame that Tim was fanning for the last 30 years. I feel that flame. And I'll explain that a little bit more as I go along. Now, I've never had the honor or the privilege to know Tim personally, as many of you would have. And it was really exciting to hear from David and to hear the presenters earlier. But you can tell from one of the presenters that Tim has also inspired a new generation of also aging activists. We're not that young anymore. So that's Matthew, and of course we heard from Aaron earlier. And I thought that the mix this morning, because I was really happy to hear from our comrade in terms of arts and culture and the impact of Tim on that. So I want to say that means that the spirit is still alive. So this is not a discussion on some idea of the past or some idea that has gone. This is a discussion of the present, and I would even dare say a discussion of the future. I did, however, have the honor of meeting people like David Abdullah, who knew Tim very personally and very close, and therefore would have invited me to the CLR James conference, where I would have first heard, and I just met Tim really as an introduction. Hello, this is Ozzi Warwick. Ozzi, this is Tim. And that's it. In that light, I had to wrap my head around what I want to say about this person that I didn't really know, and this person that unfortunately we have not, throughout the Caribbean, have not properly positioned him in terms of his contribution to the Caribbean civilization. But what was interesting for me is that when I was coming into the airport, I met a customs officer, and his question, of course, like any customs officer, would be, what is your purpose here in Antigua? So I said, well, I'm here to attend Tim, and I studied, well, how are you going to respond to that? But I'm here to attend the Tim Hector conference. He jumped back. He looked at me. This is a young man. And you know what his question was? What do you know about Tim Hector? Well, I was a bit embarrassed because I didn't really know much. I was like, well, I read a lot. And interestingly, this young man said, you know, we just do not do enough to pay attention to his great contribution. I was stunned. I mean, he don't know me. I don't know him. I don't know if he was Tim Hector's nephew, cousin, family, or maybe a student. But the point is that this person recognized that contribution, this customs officer. So I thought it was a nice start to this conference. I thought in order for me to wrap my head around what I want to say, I start off do what our generation will normally do, using one of the most advanced research tools, Google. I Googled it. And I found a few interesting things, but not much. Not much. And it led me to a website, which I only learned later on, unfortunately, is not a wrong, again, that is the Fan the Flame website with all those articles for whatever reason, and one can use conspiracy theory here, knowing that we have in this conference, cable and wireless got a mandate that, listen, shut that thing down, you know, because we don't know what they're coming to talk about, and if we give them all that material, we don't know what that will do. Right. So I was a bit at a disadvantage, but I thought I'll start with someone that I am a little more familiar with, and I think who influenced James considerably, Tim, which was CLR James. CLR James and George Padmore really gave life to the Pan-African movement. But it was not just Pan-Africanism as a singular struggle. It was also about creating a socialist society. The period of the 30s and just after World War II, the struggle against racism, because the overall topic is race, activism, and politics, against racism was also located in the struggle against colonialism and imperialism, and even further, against capitalism. C.L.R. James' articles on the question of race from very, very early on had that approach. From the Intervening in Abyssinia article in 1935, he went on, and you would see, I just want to give you an idea as to the volume of work he did in that early period. And I'm not talking about 1960s coming out of civil rights movement and so on. I'm talking about the 30s and 40s. The Communist Party's zigzags on Negro policy, that is socialist appeal in 1939, the destiny of the Negro, and I'm using terms that he would have used of that period, an historical overview series in the socialist appeal, Revolution and the Negro New International 1939, Why Negroes Should Oppose the War, Socialist Workers' Party pamphlet, The Economics of Lynching, Socialist Appeal 1940, Capitalist Society and the War 1940, Labor Will Take Care of Its Own Union Problems 1940, Negro and White Workers Must Stand Together 1940, and in 1940 he wrote a series, and I could go on, but actually I had a long list of those articles. As far as CLR was concerned, we cannot separate black liberation from the struggle for a socialist society. In fact, CLR from as early as 1940, in one of his articles, believed that the question of race is intimately tied to the question of class. One does not necessarily supersede the other. They are very much intertwined and interrelated. In his article, he said, "The Negro suffers most, and therefore he must fight most. He must fight under the general slogan, democracy for Negroes here and now." But he goes further, and this is where it gets very interesting. He must join the local workers' organization, like trade unions. He must form local Negro organizations and cooperate with political organizations that will battle for Negro rights. The Workers' Party, and he introduced here the Workers' Party, is today in the very front of that battle. Now, some of his views would not necessarily change, but will be refined later based on experiences. He went further. For wherever the working class, that element of the class element, or the revolutionary movement sustains a defeat, then the Negro is defeated, if even one lives in that community. And then he really brings home the point. The Negro must be won for socialism. There is no other way out for him in America or elsewhere. Well, I should say for him or her, using terms of the period. I'm sure he would not have made that mistake today. But he must be won on the basis of his own experience and his own activity. There is no other way for him to learn, nor for that matter any other group of toilers. If he wanted self-determination, then however reactionary it might be in every other respect, it would be the business of the Revolutionary Party to raise that slogan. Okay, so that was CLR's clarity. But how is that linked to Tim? And I was really very lucky that when I came in after passing the customs officer who was questioning my knowledge of Tim, and rightfully so, if I do say so, I was handed this book. I got really excited. This is the CLR James Journal, a review of Caribbean ideas, published in 2001. I was handed this by my comrade here. And this was yesterday morning, right? Yeah. So I had between yesterday morning, you talk about cramming, I had between yesterday morning and now, up to literally 20 minutes ago, trying to find evidence that this thinking of black liberation as well as the political struggle was intertwined as well with the workers' struggle. And fortunately, in that, I found some very interesting articles in here. One of them had to do with Walter Rodney. And this is Tim talking here. CLR James was, as usual, on the ball. This was James' critique in terms of Walter Rodney and the question of power. Walter and those of us of Walter's generation had been given a foundation to build on. That foundation was laid by CLR James himself. I say, okay. By the great W.E.B. Du Bois, by the most significant Marcus Garvey, George Padmore, and the father of African emancipation, and he said by George Padmore, the father of African emancipation, who was also socialist, and by Frantz Fanon, the philosopher of post-colonialism, or the theorist of the pitfalls of national independence. We had to build on that foundation in theory and practice, or betray the mission, as Fanon had put it. Going on further, I read an article. He wrote another article here, and this time he's talking about Stokely Carmichael, and it is a tribute he's given to his brother and comrade. And in that he said, when in the mid-70s, through Owusu Saduaki, I think I got that right, an international link was formed between the liberation movements, and here where? In South Africa, ACLM in Antigua, and Maurice Bishop, NJM in Grenada, to a lesser extent, and the organizations in the USA, all organized around African Liberation Day. For a start, Stokely stood up and took note. A black international movement was taking shape, even though barely embryonic. But what was interesting about that period and about that black liberation movement is that it was not black liberation in abstract. They also had a clear vision as to what they were going to replace the existing system with, which was to create a socialist society. And then further, he goes on to talk about CLR James and the 21st century. In other words, Tim did not see even the writings and the understanding that CLR had as something of a period. He also saw it as being relevant and necessary for the future. And that's the part I really want to get to a little later on. And in this piece, he said, and now I joke, I gave to an American friend the other day about James. In our last conversation in Buxton, London, James said to me that when he died, he would come back when South Africa was free. I looked for him then, but I did not see him at all, anywhere. But on November 30th, in the Battle of Seattle, I saw CLR James at his full 6'4" height, beaten iron in the percussion section, and he was singing away, the WTO kills people, kill the WTO. That international self-organization of people, workers, consumers, women, environmentalists, was the reincarnation of CLR James. Look out for it and him in the 21st century. I would say look out for Tim and in the 21st century. This combination is something I've been playing with, and I call it the struggle trinity. Workers' struggle, political struggle for a socialist society, and race struggle. They are one or the same, just as you have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. So the Trinity concept, which I just outlined, the struggle trinity are all manifestations of a particular struggle, which is the struggle for, and I would like to suggest, social justice. The struggle for social justice in the Caribbean started, and I think many of you all would think I'm about to say in the anti-slavery movement. But no, before that. The struggle for social justice in the Caribbean started in the Amerindian resistance to European invasion. The Amerindian population, I think, is a part of our Caribbean civilization that's sometimes left out. Now, I may feel kind of touched with this because my great-grandmother was an Amerindian. And so I tend to take that kind of personal. But there was a civilization functioning here. Wadadli, I believe, is what they called here. Kairi was Trinidad. They had trade, the Saibuni tribes that occupied most of the northern Caribbean for almost 3,000 years, trading with other tribes from Latin America and Central America. The Europeans came here, and they started to use the new term rediscover. They didn't even do that. They invaded a civilization. They came here, they saw, and invaded. That was an invasion. The struggle against slavery is a struggle for social justice. The post-emancipation riots were struggles for social justice. The strike actions in the early part of the last century were struggles for social justice. The labor riots in the 30s were struggles for social justice. The anti-colonial struggle was a struggle for social justice. The civil rights struggle was a struggle for social justice. This is the flame that Tim has been fanning for 3 decades, because I was trying to wrap my head around fanning the flames. And I was saying, what Tim trying to tell us, boy? I didn't know him, so I wasn't able to ask him direct, so I had to use my own imagination. And that is actually my alarm saying my 15 minutes is up. And so I'm coming to my little closure a little bit. And I think, one, it is acknowledgement that the flame was always there. That there has always been a flame burning in the Caribbean. And what Tim was trying to do was say, okay, that flame can't go out. The flame cannot go out. I will use all my years, make all the sacrifice that I have to keep that flame going. And I kept thinking, what is this flame that Tim is seeing? What is this flame that CLR saw? What is this flame that Butler and all of these guys, what did they see? And it must be that they saw a completely different Caribbean society where social justice was for all. Not some, but for all. You see, it is about building a Caribbean civilization. And I referred to the question earlier, what if the islands disappear? First of all, that is, a civilization is not just the geographical, it's not a geographical thing that you just touch. The Caribbean civilization is already spreading in New York, Los Angeles, London, when our foreparents went to London in the 50s. A civilization is your values. It's so much more. So you know what? Even if the sea come and take up all the islands, I want to suggest there will be a carnival somewhere in the world. There will be, people will be singing calypso in Siberia. People will be playing pan in Thailand. See, that's what we have to understand about building this Caribbean civilization. But how do we bring about the social justice? It is quite clear that we can't through the form of a vanguard party. I think CLR in 81, he dealt with that very early on. And I'll just quickly read, because I'm already over time. All right? I'm affiliated to nobody in particular. I have some friends in England and I have some friends in the US. There are people in Italy and we are very closely associated with the ideas that we have. We exchange ideas. They translate some of my stuff into Italian and people publish in England and in America and so on and so forth. But there is no affiliation in the old sense for this reason. I have now come to the conclusion, and that is a contribution to the Marxist-Leninist doctrine, that today and for some years now, we do not need a vanguard party in the sense that Lenin and others used to put it forward, or rather in the way that Lenin was interpreted as putting forward the vanguard party. The vanguard party is not necessary for the development of the workers into socialism. Marx wrote about the commune, and he said that they used to ask him this dictatorship of the proletariat that you're talking about. Where is it? He said, and he wrote about the commune, it is the way the workers will develop it. So the vanguard party is not it, okay. Mass nationalist parties have failed us. We've seen that. They came, they had a place in history, and they made their contribution, but that is not it. So what we've been thinking about, and what we have done in Trinidad, is say, no, it has to be a party that represents those values and principles, but with mass support. In other words, it cannot be 12 people sitting down and spending long hours and nights arguing whether you're a Maoist or I'm a Leninist and you're a Stalinist and so on. No, I think got the wrong guy. We can't spend our nights in other ways other than that. In other words, that is not what CLR thought, and Tim got that. And I think this is what the movement for social justice, and I wanted to kind of come to the closure on that. That is what we're trying to build. That is exactly what we're trying to build. The idea that, listen, we have to engage with students. We have to engage in the communities. We have to engage with artists. We also have to engage with the intellectuals, if you may. But we have to connect with the workers. It is a combination of all these key sectors throughout the country working towards an agenda, one specific, a clear agenda, and that is to bring about social justice once and for all. After 500 years, that flame still burning because we have not achieved that to date. And that's where we want to go. In closing, tribute to Rosie Douglas. And this part really touched me when I was going through. This one I got on the Google, actually. It was a Fan the Flame article. It's really weird. It's one of the only Fan the Flame articles you can find through Google. And it was a tribute to Rosie Douglas. And in it, what Tim was doing, he gave a long explanation and expressed his pain in losing Rosie and so on. And he was talking about something Rosie told him from Martin, a Martin Carter part of the poem. And I just wanted to read, and then Tim now in the end just wrote this little last part, almost back to Rosie. And I quote, "Now from the morning vanguard, moving on, dear comrade, I salute you and I say, death will not find us thinking that we die." And I thought, and he ended exactly like that. What a way to end. What was he talking about? And you know what I realized? He's talking about the flame. He's talking about the flame. In other words, he now transcended even his physical passing. It is about ensuring that that dream, that vision of a new Caribbean, which have been fought for all these decades, going way back since the time of the early Amerindians, that we have a duty and a responsibility to make that a reality. That flame cannot die. That flame has to keep not just being fanned, but has to spread throughout. We have to reconsolidate, regroup. We have to be honest. We need to understand our mistakes, but we need to refocus our energy in making that a reality. We've started that in Trinidad, and we're hoping that that will continue throughout the Caribbean. And I believe that is one of the key legacy that Tim Hector has left for us. Let us keep still dreaming to make that dream a reality. Thank you.